Okay, what's going on, gamers? Now, alright, I've not played Stadium because Blizzard literally will not let me play Overwatch. It soft locked me out of the game. So I thought it'd be funny to do like an Overwatch Stadium breakdown from the perspective of someone who's not actually played Stadium. This video might be really dumb. Okay, and I'm gonna be using GIMP to draw stuff out. I was gonna make a PowerPoint presentation, but okay, so what, hang on. Whoops, is Stadium. Some people handwriting looks like this, and it annoys the crap out of me because they're like, what do you mean you can't read Stadium? I want to answer the question with what is Stadium by addressing 4 different boxes. Those are definitely equally spaced. The first one is, what is the gameplay loop for Stadium? The second one is what the design philosophy is supposed to be behind the game, how decisions are made towards what they're building for. This is like your game design document, your philosophy, your concept for the game that you are working on as a game designer, not actually what the game may or may not actually be. And then the last box is what the game actually is. I'm drawing this with a mouse, so I think with these 3, you can pretty accurately identify how a game is played. So let's start with this one, the gameplay loop. So this can be real easy to say, like, oh yes, you get into a match, you acquire tokens, those tokens can then be used to buy upgrades, and those upgrades make your character more powerful, right? That's what we could say the gameplay loop for Overwatch Stadium is. However, I think that there's a little bit more to it because this is only accurately defining more so how the game is designed. I might not even say that. I'd say this is more so the method the designers are using to like virtualize the game concept. So if that's not what I mean whenever I say gameplay loop, then what do I mean whenever I say gameplay loop? The gameplay loop exists over the course of like many various different games. It's not just a single thing that you play in one game, right? So what is that one thing that arches across that whole thing? For Stadium, that is experimentation. Gameplay loop for Stadium is you jump into a match, you have an idea or you have a cool concept you want to try for a character, so you build towards making that cool concept. The game ends, you see whether or not it was good or bad, you think about whether or not you could have changed anything, and then you jump back in, either do the same character or do it with a different character. I'm going to call this a very volatile style gameplay loop, and I'll explain why. I don't know if I spelled volatile correctly, and I'll explain later why I think that's the case, or what the ramifications are of having this kind of gameplay loop. Next thing that I want to talk about is what I think the designers are trying to make the game. This lets us know the building blocks they're using in order to actually form everything, and it can let you pretty accurately predict what the next building block is going to be. What is the concept of the game? What is it supposed to be? What are each of its individual elements? I'm going to take this moment to address something that I thought about. I don't remember where they said this. I'm pretty sure they said this. I might be just gaslighting myself about this. I believe Blizzard has said in the past that they try to have, you know, like a big project that they're working on, but then they also try to make sure that they have like 2 to 3 other smaller side projects so they can stay ahead of the curve on stuff, right? I think it's very likely that we can label one of those big projects Overwatch, right? Might be able to label one of them Stadium, but I think with the success of Stadium and with other games like Smite and Deadlock, I think given how Stadium plays, I think given the fact that Blizzard has made a statement in the past that they try to do this, and also that the companies that made Smite and Deadlock have both made games that compete with Overwatch 2, I don't think it's that crazy to say that one of these projects that's behind the scenes might actually be an Overwatch MOBA. Now, would that affect the design philosophy with Stadium? It might, actually. If Stadium is supposed to be the sort of trial run for an Overwatch MOBA, then they might want to start testing out more MOBA elements so they can get a feel for how the Overwatch community is going to react to that, since that would probably be, you know, half of the player base is going to be launching into a MOBA. But with that being said, what do I think the actual game design philosophy for Stadium is? I think it's fairly simple, and I'm going to use specific words for this. I think in Overwatch you have a character. I think the general design philosophy could probably be summed up in a single word, and that is going to be augmentation. So I think generally, staying in Overwatch terms, you keep a character. Now, I'm using this term for what we'll get into later, whenever I start talking about what it means to augment a character. I think the design philosophy is for you to basically build the character yourself. That there's a whole bunch of building bricks here, and you can kind of decide where they want to go. You're given a whole bunch of bricks, and then you can lay them out however you want, and you can build your house like a bunch of Legos. I'm gonna continue that in a bit here. Now what I want to talk about is what I think the game actually is, or how the game actually plays. This is where I think it's very interesting. This is where like a lot of the problems that I have with Stadium come up. See, when we talk about the design philosophy, we're saying stuff like augmentation. And the reason that I use that word is that I don't think you're actually changing the base kit of how a character works. There's a fundamental foundation that is not being shifted. Now, this might sound sensible. If you have a solid foundation, you can make basically whatever you want on top of it, right? However, the problem is that Overwatch Stadium doesn't actually do that. Overwatch Stadium gives you a solid foundation, and then it gives you room to build a house. This house is set to specific limits that Blizzard gives you. It is not something that's custom that you can experiment all that much with. Yes, you've seen cool concepts come out of Stadium, stuff like the Baby Diva build. However, I don't think the stuff actually exists outside of this house. I think that this was stuff that was put into this house as a, oh, what if this character could do this? Or, oh, what if they could do this other thing over here? And this like space out here where you get actual very unique customization doesn't really feel like Stadium allows for. If we break it down through using something like Paladins, in Paladins you're given a character. I'd say that character also works as a foundation. However, this foundation also kind of works as a template. Instead of getting a box that you can build your house within, you ended up giving the house with its foundation, and then you can kind of add on these little installments off to the side. And what that means is you're using something that has all these components that are going to be shared with anyone else using the kit, right? But you also have these cool little things that you can do specifically because you picked this card. And what is the difference between these two? In Paladins, cards are designed to specifically change your gameplay. A good card will enable you to make certain actions. If there is a ledge and you want to jump off that ledge and you have a card that can help you do that, you can do that. But the cool part about Paladins is that cards are not brought forward with the design to help you do stuff like jumping off a ledge. They will enable something like a fluid gameplay, and then map design is allowed for you to exploit stuff like that. The problem with Stadium is that it's kind of a gimmick. You have a stadium, and then the point is to get the stadium, meaning that anything that's off here, off to the side, is completely pointless. It's not really having items to enable certain gameplay if the entire gameplay is centered around the point. If you have someone like Lucio, you might look at something like Lucio's boop and say, well, these are upgrades that help Lucio build ult through using his boop. That would enable a certain kind of gameplay, wouldn't it? No, you're wrong. You're not actually that wrong, but you're wrong in the implementation of it. The problem is that this doesn't need to adapt. If we go back to Paladins, if you have this card may help enable you to take off this ledge, right? That's what we said this card did. However, what that means is you have to play around this card. You took this card instead of another one, which means there now becomes this cool ability to outplay and counterplay you and your opponent. There's dynamics here. Because you have this card, suddenly now there's a whole nother aspect of the game to worry about. If Lucio took Big Boop, you're not worrying about anything unique. There's now just a Lucio on the enemy team with a stronger boop, and while that might be worrying, there's no unique interaction going on there. You're still worried about a boop, whether or not it's as powerful as it is. Good adaptable game design requires some level of changing how you're actually going to play. That's one of the core building blocks of making a very good customizable system. If your card, if your upgrade, whatever you want to call it, does what we call in the Paladins community a number buff, then your gameplay is going to be relatively unfun because it's not really customizable. Where if your card enables unique interactions that only happen as a result of using that card, that is a good system. If the outcome is just the same thing, but a little bit bigger, then that's not particularly fun. Then that's not good. The better one of these systems gets, the more what you'll see is that multiple augmentations will play off of one another. Both augmentations might create unique interactions that only happen as a result of one of the players picking one of them, but if both players pick one of them, you should be able to get some cool unique interaction that would not have happened without both of the players picking them. This is the core crux of a good augmentation system that I think Stadium is missing. It's these unique interactions. If this is treating Lucio Boop to be more worrying, then that's not actually an augmentation. That is a number buff. Overwatch Stadium right now feels like it's very much about creating fun loadout for X character. It's not actually about adapting that character to fit multiple situations. It just kind of feels like it's making the character taller or making the character wider. You still have the same area to work with, it's just how do you want to fit the proportions. And so what I think that means for Stadium long term is that players are going to get very bored of it. If it's just about changing the dimensions of your character, then eventually this is going to get very boring. Even if you take multiple characters, you're still doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. The unique interactions that come about from an augmentation system, they're not here. Fundamentally, in Overwatch Stadium right now, playing Zarya is the same thing as playing Lucio. That is a crazy statement to make, but the thing that Stadium is going for means that they're the exact same thing. It's picking whether or not you want long or tall. And so what I think that means for Stadium is right now it's burning very bright. big giant candle here. I think players are going to get very bored of that, and they're just going to leave. What I also think might happen is, and this is kind of a scary one, you're going to get a meta group. That looks like Mexa, hang on. You're going to get a meta group focused strictly on what the best build is for any particular character. This character has to be wide. This character has to be tall. If X character is not wide and Y character is not tall, then you've lost the game. Which I think basically is just going to make Overwatch Stadium feel like this game of people screaming at one another, why did you pick that upgrade? That upgrade sucks! And yeah, you can say toxicity exists in every single game. However, if you're designing a game, you can take strategic steps to try to avoid toxicity. One of that is allowing for adaptability in builds. If you want to avoid toxicity with augmentations, you need to make it so that there's no meta. You need to make it so that this cannot exist. However, right now, the way Stadium is built, this absolutely exists. There's very specific circumstances where you might look at an enemy team comp and say, well, you know what? I think I have to go with this build instead of this other build. And I think you're going to see that a lot more as you climb up in like the Stadium elo. And yes, this is going to be present in every augmentation system where builds can just work in lower elos if people are not good enough to counter it. I think that's the only really unique interaction that's rising out of different games of Stadium. It's does the character itself counter the enemy characters, which is not a Stadium thing, but these are just my thoughts. By the way, Blizzard, if you're not actively working on a Overwatch MOBA and someone at Blizzard is watching this thinking, wow, that sounds like a really cool idea, I'll be the project lead, take me on the team. I hate you guys, but yeah, this was just my thoughts. Anyways, have a good day. Remember to play Paladins.